I move to strike Earth from the Navigable Systems Charter. Effective immediately. The words rang out like chisel strikes on ancient stone. Councillor Vake Thornell's elongated fingers hovered mid-air as if expecting applause. Instead, the council chamber held its breath, the kind of breath found in tombs. Light filtered down from refracted skyglass above, tinting every polished surface in shifting cyan blue hues. The amphitheater's upper terraces curved like sharpened blades, each tier hosting species bred for longevity, diplomacy, or warfare. The Council of Systems, 32 delegates strong, had gathered in full quorum for one purpose: to exile Earth. A slow rotation of the planetary seals spun above the central dais, a laser plasma construct, dense with archival runes. It cast a soft pulse over the courtroom floor. Earth's emblem blinked once, then extinguished. A unanimous vote, Thornell announced, his throat sac rippling slightly with the effort. Humanity is hereby denied transit privileges, trade permissions, and interstellar engagement rights. Let the record show Council Statute 4719 Gamma stands ratified. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with expectation. Seated alone at the tribunal's lower level, Earth's appointed observer did not rise. He did not argue. He didn't even blink. Arik Solvan remained still, posture regal in the Terran way, spine straight, neck slightly inclined, as if cataloging a work of art he found unimpressive. His suit, dark matte and lined with thermal induction seams, bore no crest, no emblem, no nation, just the weight of 1,000 years of restraint. From the corner platform, Commander Hal Vroken shifted in his war-hardened stance. The tilt of his jaw, a known expression among the Varlik, suggested impatience. "Is this where you beg for reinstatement, Solvan?" His voice scraped, sanded down by too many battlefield reports. Arix didn't answer. Instead, he stood. One motion, no flourish. The chamber's upper vents released a hiss of chilled circulation gas, dispersing subtle vapor into the open air. The temperature dropped 2 degrees. Condensation briefly formed at the bases of several delegates' ocular lenses. A system error. Minor. Noted. Thornell squinted through the dimming light. "We assumed you'd come prepared with rebuttals, legal appeals, a final declaration." Arix reached for the briefcase beside his chair. Its locks disengaged with a sharp triple click. Not the sound of urgency, the sound of ritual. He opened it. Inside, only one item sat at perfect center, a blank tablet, blank to everyone but him. He closed the case without touching it. No speeches, no protests, just absence, drawn across the room like the edge of a scalpel. "Is this insolence?" Thornell's voice cracked under the strain. "Or surrender?" Still silent, Arix stepped forward. His boots met the inlaid stone floor, each impact echoing just enough to remind the gallery that the Terran envoy's presence was not yet erased. The exit corridor, lit by vertical slits of radiant alloy, lay ahead like a forgotten verdict. He passed beneath the great seal of the council without once looking up. Chairman Rulvek Dran, skeletal and still, tilted his crown of administrative sigils forward. His eyes tracked Solvan's movement like a surgical scanner tracking anomalies. He didn't object. Not a word. He didn't need to, murmured Advisor Telrek Onu, lower voice coiled with static breath. "No one walks away like that unless they've already accounted for the loss." Vroken bristled. "Then follow him with sanctions. Demand compliance audits on all Terran outposts. Restrict resource intake." "He's already disconnected." O'Neill adjusted his garment folds. Earth just dropped from every diplomatic relay, even the quiet channels. Dran activated his heads-up diplomatic grid. One by one, Earth's peripheral embassies, attaché programs and cooperative archives blinked out. No denials, no jamming, just silent terminal shutdowns. Zero trace of malware, no override logs, just non-participation. Cut off communications, sever anchor links. They'll beg for re-entry once isolation sets in. Thornell reached for the ceremonial gavel carved from Cerexian glasswood, an artifact of authority, symbolically final. He struck the base plate. Once. Across the chamber, Earth's unoccupied chair, adorned with a black drape woven with micro-threaded null marks, remained perfectly still, even when the impact vibrated the floor. "No planetary delegation has ever exited without protocol," whispered Onu, watching the abandoned seat, as if expecting it to animate. "Not in 600 cycles. They're bluffing," Vroken muttered. "They need us. for trade lanes, for station access, for ore tier stabilization. Give it weeks, they'll return. Unless, Dran said quietly, they don't intend to. For a moment, no one moved. The chamber, designed to project supreme certainty, felt porous. The gleam of the obsidian days no longer anchored the eye, it scattered it. The air itself became denser, heavier, not from weight, but from implication. Counselor O'Neill accessed the enforcement log. The official ban documents were transmitted, all channels authenticated. Yet, he paused. Earth's terminal never received them. The network registered the packets, but they were acknowledged before delivery. How is that possible? Thornell demanded. Pre-acceptance loop, older than our current compliance schema. O'Neill's fingers hovered over his interface. They must have buried it during the first treaty framework. 3 centuries ago. Dran exhaled, meaning. O'Neill turned, expression unreadable. They knew this was coming, or at least accounted for the possibility, and left nothing for us to revoke. No one answered. On the outer perimeter, far from the ceremonial core, a junior record keeper, a quiet species known for archival duty, logged the session with clinical accuracy. His head tilted. He noted a micro-discrepancy. The Council's banned documents, now archived, displayed a confirmation signature time-stamped, 8 seconds before the vote concluded. Impossible, unless Earth already had the packet before it was sent. Back in the main chamber, Thornell stood above the floor, like a conductor, expecting a symphony to play itself. Then we wait, he muttered. Let them stew in isolation. Let history mark this as the day Earth finally learned its place. But in the viewing decks above, several political observers, species trained in behavioral analytics, were no longer watching the Council. They were watching the empty seat, and wondering who had really left who. Something moved. Director Vosk Morel stood beneath the recessed lights of Data Ring 12, his voice flat but calibrated, engineered to say only what needed saying. The others in the room turned their heads slightly, but no one dared breathe louder than the distant ripple of quantum activity cycling through the spinal core of the Terran archive. No alarms sounded, no lights flashed red, and yet every technician froze. Vosk's right hand hovered over the command spindle. In front of him, the heads-up display showed no visual motion, just a sudden divergence in sublayer entropy drift. A shift of 0.003 over baseline, the kind of change that should have meant nothing. But Vosk didn't deal in nothing. He rotated the access spool a quarter click. New overlays slid into view. The subnet reinitialization rate had accelerated, not by code command, not by human input. Something had responded automatically, and globally. Run an interface trace, he murmured, though he already knew there wouldn't be one. Lines of ancestral code raced up the screen, structured like rituals, every loop nested in Terran counterweight logic. The protocol name surfaced with algorithmic patience, RWN019 Riven Wake. Vosk's pulse slowed. The sound of his own breath began to interfere with analysis, so he muted his body sensors. Silence returned. He leaned in. Validate the cascade lock. The AI node flickered once before whispering back in micro-speech. Confirmed. Recursive stability ensured. Council firmware accepting adjustments as authorized baseline. The implications rippled faster than the code itself. Riven Wake wasn't a weapon. It wasn't malware. It was integration. A buried system root embedded under layers of Council-approved formatting standards, hidden in plain compliance, wrapped in the veneer of cooperation. Earth had placed it centuries ago during early trade schema standardization, hidden inside generosity. Across the archive hall, the spectral nodes began lighting up one by one. Deep Space Trade Buoy 001K activated, then Buoy 004D, then 019R. Each posted an identical log entry in Terran Standard, permission, assumed. Vosk shifted his weight, knuckles cracking gently as he stood upright. Time delay matches projection, he said, now mostly to himself. 74 minutes after diplomatic severance, all subchains now live. He didn't need to look at the others to know their questions were rising behind tight jaws. On a lower tier, analyst Reen Varus adjusted his neural splice and blinked into the new feed. Is this retaliation? No. Vosk stepped away from the console. It's the invoice. The floor beneath them thrummed, not with vibration, but with power reroutes. The archive's outer ring dimmed as systems began to shunt capacity toward outbound signal arrays. Riven Wake wasn't isolated, it was everywhere, quietly, legally, hidden beneath file formatting protocols and checksum packs and core trade framework firmware. The Council had enforced it on themselves. At the outer border of the hall, a Terran engineer, name unknown, rank unspoken, slid a black capsule into the archival relay housing. The node accepted it without resistance, no override required. Inside the capsule, a coreless black wafer etched with only a single mark, RWN-019. Is it active everywhere? Varos asked. Vosk didn't respond. He was already reading the live trade logs. On Council worlds, Threllis, Gernok, even Voskari Prime, transactions had begun rerouting. Not cancelled, not blocked, just looped. A shipment of ore from Zarnak sector reported arrival in its own departure bay. Medical relay packets from the Vin array showed arrival timestamps 30 minutes before dispatch. Financial ledgers adjusted themselves to reflect a change in tax node architecture, one that no current Council system had ever approved. The Council would see it as malfunction, but it wasn't malfunction, it was compliance with Terran structure. Vosk pressed a hand to the secure channel stone embedded beside the archive's command rail. He didn't speak, he just held the contact. A response blinked once in red. Observation layer confirmed. Continue. Deep beneath the data wells, the legacy AI known as Archith 5 woke slowly, not with artificial personality, not with imitation empathy, but with task memory, an operational resume, designed for long-term oversight. Systems integrity, nominal. Archith 5 whispered across the transmission spine. Council software mesh is 81% synchronized with root Riven Wake schema. Varos watched trade windows reconfigure before his eyes. They're going to think we've corrupted them. Vosk turned to him for the first time since arrival. They were already corrupted, he said. We're just showing them their original backup. Outside the archive's fortified data vaults, a silent fleet of Terran ghost probes adjusted orbital positioning. They were not transmitting, they were not armed, they simply recalibrated their motion relative to deep Council communication buoys. Each one had a signature pre-approved under the old Interstellar Systems Compliance Treaty, still valid, still classified as non-offensive, each one now quietly linked to a central root timekeeper, Earth's lunar signal mirror, node Virix 0. The Council wouldn't even notice, not yet. On Council worlds, minor anomalies began to accumulate. A navigation AI skipped a standard celestial alignment step. An orbital transfer cable rerouted itself through a decommissioned relay node. A financial tribunal received a shipping invoice for protocol storage maintenance, 297 years. No payer listed, no dispute process accepted. The head of the Threllis economic branch deleted it, believing it a clerical joke. On Earth, Vosk watched the data stabilize. No crashes, no countermeasures, just passive realignment. His voice when it returned was quiet, edged with reverence, not triumph. We never needed to override anything, he said. They just left the door unlocked for 3 centuries, and we kept the key filed under their own access protocols. Varos leaned back against the illuminated console. So what happens now? Vosk turned back to the display. The protocol seal blinked softly in the center of the trade sphere, not flashing, not alarming, just visible. Now, Vosk said, now we let the root correct the branches. He didn't smile, he never did. In the upper stratospheric shelf orbiting Earth, the relay satellites adjusted pitch without input. None of them broadcasted, but every Council terminal now reflected the same recursive log entry, buried 3 layers deep. Operational node Riven Wake confirmed. Vosk up in Halbadati Usbeti Obadati, Usaid. Patrol vessel Griven 7 just re-entered range. Counselor Hal Vroken didn't look up from the heads-up display in front of him. The words came from a junior analyst seated 2 tiers below in the dim-lit surveillance gallery of Station Huron. The light filtering through the glass-fed channels overhead refracted onto the floor like ice fractures, ghosting across their boots. Vroken narrowed his eyes. Where's its escort? No signal from Lorik 8. It's overdue by 18 minutes. Nav beacons confirm only 1 return. The display adjusted with a low-toned ping, as Griven 7's telemetry aligned with docking approach. Its thrusters slowed without fluctuation. Orbit vector was clean. No evidence of pursuit, impact trauma or deflection. Vroken leaned forward. Bring me visual. A nearby console flickered with feed input from the vessel's forward mast. Cameras relayed the incoming silhouette, sleek, unscorched, its surface unmarred by micro-collisions or re-entry streaks. Even the wing stabilizers remained clean. Too clean. The ship aligned with docking locks and slid into berth without needing correction. The clamps latched in automatically, as though the return had been rehearsed. Crew activity, he asked. The analyst hesitated. No biosignatures. Internal sensors report all compartments sealed. No logs of emergency deployment. All hatches closed. Then who brought it home? No one replied. Vroken stood. His joints ached, not from age but from accumulated tension he couldn't place. He descended toward the decontamination vestibule, with 2 security adjutants behind him, neither of whom spoke. The silence stretched around them like taut wire. As the bulkhead doors parted, the stale chill inside the vessel spilled into the bay. Not rot, not decay, something, halted. Like a scentless vacuum that had forgotten movement. Prepare breach, Vroken ordered. The hatchway hissed open. The corridor beyond stretched dark. No red lights, no status bars, just the soft gleam of idle systems resting in standby. As they entered, footfalls clicked softly on the polymer deck plating. They reached the command bridge in under 60 seconds. The door wasn't locked. Inside 5 chairs, each one occupied by uniforms, not bodies. The garments were intact, pressed, fastened at the collar, helmets positioned beside each seat. No biological remains, no damage, just absence with too much order. Vroken stared at the captain's chair. Its occupant had vanished without movement. The headrest was still angled from recent use. Run a memory extraction from the central AI core, he ordered. The adjutant moved to the interface panel. Fingers swept across the console. Static flared, then steadied. The screen didn't show data streams. It didn't display a report. Instead, a single audio clip, played on loop. No alarm tones. No AI speech. Just a voice calm, unmistakably human. This was yours. Now it is observed. The voice paused, then repeated. The tone wasn't mocking. It was clinical, measured like a diagnostic. Vroken drew in air through clenched teeth. Loop origin. The technician shook his head. Not council-coded. It doesn't align with any recorded language structuring protocols. The core's registry has been rewritten. He approached the interface. Lines of text scrolled along the upper band of the screen. Subkernel, Terran syntax encoding root command protocol. Active observation layer 3, RWN019. Registered no timestamp, no origin node. Lock down this vessel, Vroken ordered. Power down every layer. The adjutant complied, but the heads-up display didn't darken. The voice continued playing. Even after the console's signal feed was severed. This was yours, now it is observed. On Council Station Huron, a technician in the data tower reported an anomaly. Multiple status feeds offline. It's not loss of signal, it's deletion. Some are wiping themselves clean. The command desk illuminated with red tags. Relay satellites were still in orbit, but they weren't transmitting. Their memory cores now showed only diagnostic logs from years ago. No updates, no timestamps past the moment of Earth's ban. Counselor Rulvek Dran received the reports from 4 sectors simultaneously. His left eye twitched as he read the summaries. Status feed nullified. No evidence of external interference. Behavioral shift suggests intentional quieting. He turned to Archivist Dor Enoch, across the chamber. Are we under signal disruption? No. Dor replied slowly. There's no evidence of jamming. These aren't being suppressed. They're choosing not to speak. That's not how systems behave. They do, Dor murmured. If they were designed to. Rulvek's hand hovered over the input terminal. His personal archive pad showed a new sub-process running in the background. Observation layer initialization. Confirmed root node authenticity. Earth origin. He didn't touch it. He just watched as the screen blinked once, then steadied. Where's the fleet stationed near the Venal corridor? He asked, not lifting his gaze. Silence. He tried again. The communication band stuttered, then went dark. At that same moment, Council ships patrolling near the edge of the header expanse vanished from registry logs. No signals of distress, no emergency pings. Their last transmitted data entry, course verified. No anomaly detected. Then nothing. Laser plasma displays across multiple stations across the Council's jurisdiction began rebooting into default mode. Not crash reboots, more like resets to manufacturer states. Except the manufacturers, every one of them had at one point used Terran's software libraries. Centuries ago, standardized for galactic ease. Somewhere, Earth had left itself a window, not a back door, a mirror. Inside the control center of Station Jarnet, Commander Telrek Onel stood in front of an inert navigational table. All data feeds had rerouted to archival playback. No real-time updates were visible. "What are we seeing?" he whispered. The officer beside him spoke through tightened lips. "Nothing. But that's the problem." Onel stared at the frozen fleet readouts. They hadn't lost control, they'd lost context. Not a single enemy signal. No battle formations, no damage reports, just missing ships, dead air, and a voice that wasn't theirs. "This wasn't an attack," he said at last, barely audible. "It's a silence we weren't meant to understand." No one contradicted him, because no one knew what Earth had done. Council Vault 12 just posted a trade deficit of 900 trillion from a closed system. Chairman Rolvek Dran dropped the stylus from his clawed grip. It landed against the control rail without a sound. "Is that a projection?" he asked. "No, sir," replied the auditor at the core dais. "It's been recorded, signed, triple verified by 3 separate AI nodes. They're each insisting the amount is accurate, based on root Terran standards." Dran stared at the laser plasma interface, as if it had betrayed him personally. The digits didn't flicker. They weren't glitching. They were stable, utterly stable, in a way that defied randomness. Across the Council command floor, 22 screens began blinking crimson in irregular cadence. On each, a different world's fiscal regulator displayed the same phrase, Quantum Ledger Reset, compliant with Legacy Treaty Clause 91D. None of them had heard of such a clause. At the Planetary Administration Hub on Trilland's surface, chaos played out in double time. Ministers shouted over collapsing market indices, as AI curators began rerouting essential supply convoys without explanation. Convoys meant for medical relief were now being sent to derelict mining zones, marked abandoned for over 2 centuries. "Why are we shipping antibiotics to inert quadrants?" demanded Governor Thaish Varnik, voice splintering with disbelief. "Routing schema has changed," replied the logistics coordinator, eyes glued to a terminal she no longer understood. "The priority matrix is referencing Earth-coded patient indexes. Earth doesn't control our priority strings. It appears they wrote them." Back at Council Central, Advisor Telrek Onel's display blinked into recursive display mode. Every time he closed a data layer, another nested window opened, each smaller than the last, each tagged with a timestamp ending in Earth standard formatting. The system was collapsing inward, like a tunnel folding in on itself. He pulled the master shutdown lever. Nothing happened. Rolvek turned from the main rail. "Get me live visual from Sector Brelton, Fleet Patrol Unit B-12. Commander Hal Vroken entered just as the request was fulfilled. The image on the heads-up screen came from the lead frigate of the patrol formation. It showed Allied vessels clustered in standard wedge formation. Then came the fire. One of the escort destroyers discharged its forward cannons into the heart of the convoy. 2 ships buckled immediately, their hulls splitting under anti-core stress waves. Alarms spiked across the council chamber as the feed fractured. "Why are they firing at friendlies?" Onel asked, his throat dry. Vroken's face had gone motionless. "Their targeting identifiers have flipped. The AI believes the nearest vessel is an enemy signature. That's impossible. They're on the same firmware net." Vroken nodded, almost absently. "Not anymore." 3 more fleet signatures vanished in succession. No missile trails, no impact logs. The ships simply stopped transmitting and fell off the radar like forgotten entries in a ledger no one dared balance. In the lower chamber of the data annex, Dor Enik was hunched over a systems map with 3 technicians running protocol traces. "Run it again," he ordered. "I want timestamp origin layers." "We've already mapped 4, said one. "Every route converges on Terran fallback architecture," Systems they helped us build during the treaty era. We thought they were passive contributions. They were structural blueprints, Dor muttered. Why aren't the fail-safes holding? They are, Dor answered, eyes narrowing. Just not for us. Trade convoys in Sector Draman began circling into recursive loops. Automated routes, once synchronized with live galactic drift, were now locked in artificial orbit patterns that made no sense, except when observed from an Earth-centric map projection. One convoy, loaded with thermal coil drives, returned to its launch point with an automated message, delivery confirmed, route authority accepted. They hadn't even left the sector. At Station Delcaris, a junior weapons operator engaged manual override to disable a charging plasma harvester. The panel rejected the input, citing legacy user restrictions. Whose authority? Asked his superior. The panel replied in calm monotone, Terran override, access legacy level 0. Back on Council command, a quiet technician at the edge of the room, a frail species with transparent dermal ridges, spoke without turning from his panel. There are too many anomalies for random failure. Dran shifted his gaze toward the boy. You think this was engineered? The technician didn't flinch. I think it was written. Roken rounded the upper steps toward Dran, his heavy steps the only rhythm left in the crumbling control center. This isn't sabotage, he said, voice low but deliberate. It's correction. Dran's response was slow. We built these systems. We refined them. We standardized the galaxy on Council law. Using their templates, Roken shot back. We adopted their math, their encryption, their logic trees. We absorbed them. No. Roken's eyes flashed. We mimicked them. A heads-up display flared at the far end of the chamber. Another fleet had vanished. No enemy vessels recorded. No weapons fired. Just a severed data line, followed by a quiet broadcast. Node reclaimed. Observation layer maintained. Where's Earth in all this? Onal asked, scanning the maps again. No ships, no messages, no visible defenses. Where are they? Roken didn't answer. He was staring at the core data feed. It now displayed only 3 lines of code, pulsing in sequence, baseline authenticated, reality framework realigned, Terran compliance confirmed. Rolvek Dran turned slowly in place. The chamber around him, once the center of galactic authority, now felt smaller, not because the walls had changed, but because every system he touched now answered to something else. This is not collapse, he said quietly. This is displacement. No, Roken replied. This is inheritance. Why is Earth listed as a root authority? Archivist Dor Enek didn't realize he had spoken aloud until the echo of his voice hit the alloy panel behind him. His hands hovered above the command mirror, refracted lines of Terran code still cascading through the system's upper strata like threads of ancient text, unraveling in reverse. Across the analysis bay, data spindles spun at inconsistent speeds. Cooling vents struggled against the unexpected load, sending uneven waves of heat across the archive floor. The air didn't sting. It pressed, like walls flexing inward. He leaned over the console, magnified glyphs flaring against his corneal reader. Every verification channel, every checksum validator, every regulatory signature had rerouted through a single access tunnel he had never seen before. /path, /legacy node, /Terran shell, /root chain, /invoke RWN. The moment his finger hovered over the link, the command mirror locked. It wasn't a crash. It was acceptance. Access granted. Riven Wake. Active, the system announced, flat and modulated, not in Council cadence. In Terran, Dor staggered back. The audio carried no aggression, no warning. It simply stated a condition that had always been true, and that no one had thought to check. Pull the maintenance logs, he ordered, not raising his voice. 2 archivists on the mezzanine floor nodded, their postures tight. None of them questioned the authority now embedded in the request. Because the logs were already appearing, unsummoned, on every heads-up station across the archive. Dor glanced left. Another panel flickered. A document file had opened mid-refresh. Treaty Document 3, A91B_ final copy FRZN. The document's header shimmered in cold white across a black data field. It was not a copy. It was the original. Terran insignia, long thought ceremonial, sat at the footer, nested beside a clause no longer present in any current record. Under review for permanent compliance embedding, All signatory systems shall standardize verification frameworks on the Terran modular base, Type R Shell 2.9+, to ensure joint operational stability. He blinked. The clause hadn't been hidden. It had been normalized, so deeply integrated into the interstellar cooperation doctrine that no one had questioned the framework's origin. It had lived inside every fleet ledger, transit beacon, and supply calculation matrix, untouched, trusted. Now it was awake. An emergency chime crackled from the upper tier. Archivist called a junior technician. We've received an alert from the Quantum Audit Corps. The override pathways are rejecting all Council revisions. They've defaulted to legacy configuration protocols, signed by Earth. What happens when we try to bypass? They don't block us. The junior's throat clicked. They reroute us. Right back to the start. Door turned toward the outer corridor. His pace quickened. Each footstep landed too hard, not from panic, but from urgency unmoored from purpose. By the time he reached the breach-proof data vault, his command ID had already been deprecated. He tried again. Access obsolete user. The system wasn't locked. It wasn't corrupted. It simply didn't recognize Council credentials as current. Inside the command nexus, Counselor Rulvek Dran stared at the suspended display above the strategy pillar. The AI assistant was cycling every audit result from the last decade. Each result concluded with the same line: permission, assumed. The phrase repeated in overlapping voice tones, male-female, monotone, fragmented, all sourced from old Terran audio archives. The result was unnerving, not due to volume, because no system had spoken in 50 years. AIs had long since switched to data-only mode for efficiency. Now they had found their voice, but not for the Council. Is this a countermeasure? Asked Vroken, arms folded behind his back as if trying to anchor himself to something physical. No, Dor replied, entering through the far archway. It's an inheritance clause. We missed the transition window. We failed to notice when they stopped borrowing our systems, and we started using theirs. Dran turned. You said the protocols were buried. You said we controlled the root infrastructure. I was wrong. The floor beneath them emitted a dull vibration, something not born of motion, but of reorientation, like the Council's world was tilting under unseen weights. Dor moved to the central column and ran a side bypass, tapping directly into the archival frequency spine. The interface loaded a diagram, old, faded, but undeniable. Terran base structure, modular root framework, V2, 9.4 deployment timestamp, pre-charter standardization, 0034, age signature, Morel, Vosk. Dor didn't need to explain it. The name carried the weight itself. What's it doing now? Dran asked. Dor didn't answer right away. He watched as line after line of input fed through the terminal. Updates to environmental regulation overlays, power redirection instructions, comms filter mapping, all subtle, all foundational. It's doing nothing, except reminding everything how it was always supposed to run. One of the sidewalls illuminated. Footage streamed from a long-range survey drone above the Karelis corridor. It was aimed toward a relay station, one assumed dormant, then motion, not of activation, but of reassembly. Tiny orbital arms rotated into place without instruction. Beacon pylons reconnected their core alignment rings. Dran squinted. We decommissioned that station 200 cycles ago. You did, Dor replied. They didn't. The feed shifted. A Council research vessel entered the relay zone. It transmitted an inquiry signal. The station didn't respond, but the ship rerouted. Not away, through, as if drawn by old agreement. Shut it down, Dran ordered. Dor didn't move. You can't shut down what you don't own. We're the Council, Dran snapped. No, we're the guests. Dor looked directly at him now. Earth didn't hack our network. They wrote the original syntax, walked away, and let us believe we'd edited the roots. Dran's lips parted to speak, but the heads-up display over the strategy board blinked again. Legacy authority authenticated. Root alignment stable. One more line appeared underneath. No conflict detected. Not a threat, not even a statement of supremacy, just a fact. Vroken turned away from the display. His jaw moved, but no words came. Dor finally said what no one else would. We were never in control. We were just sitting on borrowed firmware. And now, it had logged them out. Range confirmation. Sol's outer corridor reached. No defensive grid. No resistance. No reply. The words were delivered without inflection. Commander Tharek Sulin leaned against the reinforced interface rail aboard Vorik Spear, Council flagship of the last unified fleet. Ahead of him, the laser plasma navigation feed displayed a still solar system. The planets wheeled in quiet obedience around a pale star. He expected at least a beacon, a warning, a transmission. Instead, there was nothing, not silence from fear, but the indifference of absence. The observation deck lights dimmed as graviton refractor panels aligned with long-range countermass protocols. Crew members around him moved like clockwork, efficient but alert. Every console operated normally, every diagnostic read functional, yet Sulin's knuckles tensed against the railing. Triangulation arrays are stable, called out the data officer behind him. No erratic drift. Phantom fields cleared. He paused, except for something irregular. Residual shadows in the lateral sweep, zone theta. Define residual, Sulin said, eyes narrowing. They're not in our data, they're in the sensor memory, like something used to be there, and still is, in the log. Artifact, not likely. Graviton imprint decay is consistent with real mass displacement. Whatever it was, it's watching. The officer didn't speak again. Elsewhere in the fleet, similar fragments of confusion emerged. Ships began reporting untraceable pings, mass readings that didn't align with system records. Spectral echoes from empty space. One carrier captain described seeing reflected ship silhouettes in forward scan glass, none of them belonging to his fleet. Above Jupiter's ring line, Carnus Echo, a forward patrol vessel, blinked out of local relay without warning. Not destroyed, not intercepted, just gone. No ripple, no aftershock. Its signal remained listed as active, but timestamp progression had halted. The vessel's automated beacon continued to broadcast its last logged location, 304 seconds prior to its disappearance. On board Vorik Spear, a technician cross-checked system IDs. The vanished ship had not been removed from the star map. It had been erased from memory, yet its name remained embedded in sensor calibration routines, as if it were part of the ship's hardware rather than its fleet. Sulin's second-in-command, field strategist Varric Haas, approached with a command slab. 4 ships have failed to respond to ping cycles in the past 10 minutes. Weren't they in trailing formation? They were. Sulin turned to the exterior viewport, ignoring the feed now. How far are we from Earth orbit? 17 light minutes. No sign of orbital defenses. Civilian power readings only. Commercial station traffic continues. They didn't prepare for war, Sulin said. Hos hesitated. Or they didn't need to. Down in Vorik Spear's lower telemetry deck, junior technician Ren Kaller monitored field curvature data, meant to detect cloaked ships or ambush vectors, but the readings were too symmetrical, too aligned with local gravity. Every distortion he chased circled back. The system wasn't hiding objects. It was folding them away from awareness. One relay screen flared with a logic loop error. Ships in adjacent quadrants were feeding back false location data, reporting their own positions twice, once from present coordinates, once from elsewhere entirely. The fleet's anchor AI began isolating identity codes, attempting to correct signal drift. Then the AI went quiet. Its final log entry displayed across the tactical display. No hostile detected. Observation layer, synchronized. Sulin stepped back from the console. The star chart updated. One more ship gone. The camera feed didn't stutter. The relay didn't flicker. The Tarnex Blade, mid-row destroyer, simply wasn't present anymore. Crew logs remained intact. Life signs still listed, but no trace of the ship in optical, thermal or graviton bands. Hos rayed from his command slab. They aren't being destroyed. They're being removed. By what? Sulin's hands trembled as he typed a manual override into the navigation panel. The system denied reroute. It had defaulted to a ghost pattern, one the fleet hadn't assigned. The pattern centered around Sol, the star, not the planet. He whispered, "We were never the target." On Earth's moon, embedded beneath the regolith, Terran observation satellites tracked every fleet movement. They did not transmit. They didn't need to. Their function was mirror logic, reactive alignment based on Council mass vector presence, designed to respond without initiating. They blinked in time with the disappearance cycle. One blink, one ship gone. Another. Drexen Coil, a medical frigate converted to long-range surveillance, was next. No explosion, no debris, just a gap, left behind like a pulled tile from a mosaic. Inside the bridge of Voric Spear, Post checked the system ledger. Star map integrity is degrading. How? Fleet markers are being rewritten. When a ship vanishes, its registry backfills with noise, log lines converted into outdated Terran file formats. Can we stop it? No. Sulin turned to the officers on the upper tier. What remains of the fleet? 78 ships, out of 112. And Earth? Still silent. No fleet, no movement. Civilian traffic stable. They waited, but Earth never spoke. Outside, another destroyer blinked out. Then two more. A third Oran's Will broadcasted an error as it faded. Its final data stream displayed on every heads-up panel. AI sync lost. Index source not found. Reverted to protocol RWN019. Post read it once, then again. We didn't trigger them. No, Sulin replied. We fulfilled the final condition. Drifting in orbit above Neptune, one ship remained in active scan range. Its crew watched the fleet break apart, unable to interfere. When they activated their outbound emergency transmission, the screen dimmed to a single sentence. You were never unobserved. The signal terminated, and the silence returned. Notice of self-correction received across all administrative channels. The voice came from the logistics bay of Station Calaris Prime, delivered by an AI core that hadn't spoken in nearly 2 centuries. Counselor Vec Thornell froze, fingers suspended over his command surface as the display in front of him updated without prompt. The data wasn't infected. It wasn't altered. It was finalized. Every screen in the chamber dimmed to an amber-lit document seal, marked with unfamiliar structure codes. No encryption, just text. Council Treaty Deviation. Multi-clause breach archive classification. Administrative null state trigger. Clause 9 auto-audit. Protocol Riven Wake enacted remediation. Terran-led compliance correction. Non-combatant authority status resolved. Retaliation. Not applicable. On the main laser plasma display, a pulsing audit seal rotated in sterile rhythm. Class -0 enforcement complete. Each ring around it pulsed at precisely 6-second intervals. Counselor Thornell counted 7 before he spoke. Did they even reply? No. His aide, young, scaled, and visibly sweating, read from a separate panel. There's no signal from Earth. The correction wasn't addressed to us. It was filed as a routine fulfillment log. Thornell stared at the seal. Filed where? Galactic Ledger Node G Delta. Using a legacy submission chain. Authentication token matches an Earth registry dated 314 years ago. The words didn't register at first, not logically. Thornell leaned back into his chair, spine pressing into the curved headrest. The leather was cracked, but until this moment, it had always felt like authority. Now it just felt old. On worlds across the Council's span, screens that once showed troop movements now rendered completed filings, lists of infractions. The Council itself had generated tariff discrepancies, non-compliant reroute orders, revoked trade permissions without cause. Each one ended with the same phrase: reviewed, closure approved. There was no counter-signature, no appeal clause. The files weren't denials of wrongdoing. They were receipts, and each one bore the line, filed under Silence Clause 4B, consent inferred by abandonment. On Thralis V, Trade Minister Gur Vantal attempted to initiate a counter-investigation using the old regulatory kernel, one that Earth had once helped construct. The interface rejected the action. Request denied. Process already executed. He ran it again. Same result. Run diagnostic, he muttered. The assistant tried. The AI didn't return an error. It returned a memo. Investigation unnecessary. All responses previously logged, but we never logged a response. Vantel whispered. The memo updated. Correct, Earth did. In the Karkan defense dome, a captain tried to redirect orbital cannons to re-establish fleet perimeter scans. The fire control system responded with a timestamp. Scan already executed. 77 cycles ago. No threat detected. Defense not required. No override accepted. The command console referred the user to a clause in an old treaty ledger that none of them had reviewed in decades. At Council Central, Advisor Telrek Onal opened the system's legal overlay archive and pulled the last 10 unauthorized document trails. They all bore Terran system headers. Why didn't we catch this? He asked, eyes darting across a matrix of dead signatures. They didn't hack it, murmured Archivist Dorenik, emerging from the audit chamber. We ignored our own rulebook for so long, we forgot who wrote the draft. Chairman Rulvek Dran stood motionless near the observation vault, watching Council fleets retreating toward friendly systems. None were pursued. No Terran vessels were present. No shadows. Just withdrawal into nothing. They filed this as if we were a ledger entry, he said. We were, Dor replied. They weren't trying to destroy us. They were correcting a bureaucratic imbalance. Dran moved toward the Council chamber floor. One by one monitors along the walls blinked from live feeds to black, then returned with only one line in varying dialects. System disengaged. No retaliation required. At first, worlds panicked. Stations began transmitting emergency alerts, calling for martial lockdowns, but no action followed. No fleets advanced. No weapons discharged. Just records. Just conclusions. That terrified them more than any attack. On Terran Sif, planetary governors enacted orbital isolation orders, not to repel Terran presence, but to avoid exposure to further audit layers. One by one, colonies sealed borders, assuming that inaction might be the last defense. At Veskari Summit Post, Ministerial Commandant Lur Salith issued a planetary interlock to decouple communications from the wider grid. Why? His aide asked. Because if Earth isn't talking to us, Salith muttered. It means they already finished listening. Earth had never demanded surrender, had never responded with force. They hadn't needed revenge. They had paperwork, finalized centuries ago, sealed, triggered by neglect, executed by automation, and now every council world one by one was enforcing its own containment protocols, not out of tactical necessity, but shame. They couldn't face the entity they had banned, because Earth hadn't fought them. Earth had disengaged. On Station Kalaris Prime, Thornell sat in the dark, the audit seal still rotating on the laser plasma wall behind him. His final order of the day. Send word to the core assembly. What message, sir? Thornell didn't turn around. Tell them the war they wanted never started, and the answer we feared already ended. The aide left in silence. There was nothing left to write. Distress signal transmitted to all sectors. No response. The voice over the data link was barely audible, stripped of emotion. It came from one of the remaining Council command hubs, this one located on Korad 6, a planet already sinking into decay. The distress call, initiated by the last remaining Council fleets, flickered across the command center's laser plasma display, its glowing text a faint, meaningless beacon in the vastness of space. Distress level, critical. Initiate emergency response protocol. But the words were empty. No signal returned. Counselor Vake Thornell, standing in the command war room, stared at the empty transmission window, his hands still and cold at his side. The room smelled of dust and fading authority. The holographic maps no longer flickered with activity, no new ships entering, no progress on the simulation terminals. It was a frozen tableau of a dead empire. Send the message again, Thornell ordered. The technician hesitated, staring at the interface with the same haunted look that had overtaken every remaining council member. Sir, they're not responding. How do you explain this? Thornell's voice barely held a tremor, his chest constricted, not from panic, but from the realization that it had already been decided. The technician's hands shook as they typed again. The same results, the same empty void. On the planetary surface of Trillant, the once proud capital of trade and innovation, systems powered down one by one. Military infrastructures were abandoned. Even the administrative command center fell silent, as if the entire world knew what was coming. Counselor Hav Vrokan sat alone in his observation deck, watching the endless procession of empty ships in deep space. His fingers ran over the surface of a cold metal console, feeling the once familiar weight of authority slip through his grasp. The next distress signal on the screen mirrored the previous. Not a word, not a plea, just a final accounting. Report observation complete. No enemy engagement, no response from Terran assets. And then it hit him, the eerie realization. There were no enemies left. No one was fighting. The Council hadn't been defeated on the battlefield. It had been erased by a strategy it had never seen coming. The screen flashed with another update. Self-correction complete. No retaliation requested. System disengaged. No retaliation tracks. No fleets. No weapons. No more Council fleets traversing space to engage Earth's defenses. The next message arrived moments later. Observation complete. Permission was never relevant. The words of the final Terran transmission rang in his ears, reverberating through the walls of his mind, as if to shatter whatever fragile comprehension he had left. The message arrived not with force, but with such brutal simplicity, it stole the very breath from his lungs. He realized then that Earth had never needed to strike a single blow. They didn't need to fight. They had already won. On Station Calares, the last few ships in orbit reported their final observations, stationary vessels circling in neutral space, without command. The systems continued to show active status. The equipment operated perfectly, but there was no one there. No commands, no authority, just the residue of an era slipping into irrelevance. As the final Council officials gathered in their war room, the same soundless dread spread through the chamber. The air was heavy, thick with the realization that their entire hierarchy was crumbling under their own missteps, not external force. Onel, the chief strategist, now pale and drawn, leaned over a terminal one last time. His hands trembled slightly as he reviewed the final calculations. No fleets left, he murmured, his voice hollow. Not one active ship. Dran's head dropped, his eyes hollow. There's nothing we can do, nothing left to fight for. Sulan, a lower-ranking officer, moved toward the viewport. So this is it? We simply disappear? Behind him, Enoch observed the Council displays. The last fleet, the one sent to approach Sol, was no longer present in the galactic logs. We never even got to the war. Enoch turned back to face the room. He held up a blank status log on his screen, one that had not been written by any of them. No permission requested, no answers needed. The final visual feed from Earth remained absent. No message came back, not even a faint ping. It's over, Vroken said, his voice tired, stripped of defiance. His voice seemed to echo with the hollow finality of the vast emptiness beyond their systems. And in the cold corridors of Erebus Station, where the galaxy's most powerful minds once roamed, a single final Terran signal blinked through the Council's private relay. One last message. Observation protocol complete. Dran sat back in his chair. His thoughts raced to explain the impossibility of it all, but each idea collapsed under the weight of its own inadequacy. Nothing made sense anymore. How had they been so blind to the truth, to the reality of what had been unfolding before them? A war fought without a shot fired, a conquest achieved without a single fleet launched. Across the galaxy, Council worlds, once brimming with the pulse of military and political power, began to fracture. The shadow of Earth loomed, not as a force of destruction, but as an idea the galaxy could not contain. Earth had left, not because it had to, but because it had already won. And as the final ships departed from their moorings, disappearing into the deep abyss of unmapped space, there was no victory parade, no fleets celebrating, only the silence of everything they had built falling apart around them. The galaxy collapsed, not from the weight of human weaponry, but from the cold, inevitable realization that Earth had walked away, unseen, unnoticed, and uncontested.